The PCI Council's guidance and procedures for remote assessments talks about the impact to evidence reliability and assessment assurance when you're testing documentation. And it ranks it as low because you can remotely review documentation very easily. In our Online Audit Manager, we ask our clients to upload relevant documentation, and we review that offline before we have a conversation with our client. We use that review period to prepare and have a good, thorough conversation about their documentation. But I fear that too many auditors today in the audit industry are strictly relying upon remote documentation review, and they're not asking good questions to make sure of two things that the council points out. Number one, that personnel in the organization understand what the documentation says. The document itself does not provide us with that assurance, and so you do have to do conversations and walkthroughs to understand if people are actually following the documentation. It's such an important test of that control. And then secondly, it's a way to corroborate. If you only look at the documentation and you don't have follow-up conversations, you're not corroborating if maybe the documentation was edited or changed before it was provided to the auditor. Sometimes people are motivated to do that, and it doesn't accurately reflect what's actually going on in the environment. And so I can remember a time when I had reviewed the documentation of a certain company that had hired us to do an audit, and I had prepared my audit plan based on all of the documentation that I had reviewed prior to my visit with the company. And then I had a meeting with the operations manager, and I was looking forward to this because this was the person who owned many of the controls that were going to be tested. And so when I started talking her through the different things that I had read in the documentation, she said, "Oh, we don't do that, we don't do that, we don't do that." And I finally said, well, the compliance officer provided me with this documentation, and so how is it that you're doing something totally different? And she said, "Oh, we don't listen to the compliance officer." And in that moment, I had a very good understanding of what was happening in that environment, and there were different issues that needed to be dealt with in terms of the effectiveness of internal control within that organization. And so that's why documentation review needs to be corroborated with other things in order to ensure that your documentation is being followed by your employees.